Thanks very much, Danny. It's great to be here. I came to the colloquium last year and determined to come back and present this time, and have been lucky enough to have my paper accepted. Now, this time last year, there was quite a lot of talk about the Essendon-ASADA Saga as well, and a year later it's still going on, and some might say it's gone on way too long. Others might be hoping that it keeps on going. And I must say, as a Carlton supporter, I'm still looking for revenge from 1993, when Essendon killed us in the grand final. And while we did get some revenge in 1999 with the 1-point victory in the preliminary final, still not quite the same as a premiership, and we went on to get thrashed by North Melbourne in the grand final. So, as a Carlton supporter, I should wish Essendon ill, but as a lover of AFL, they are one of the great clubs, and I'd like to see them put this behind them and get back to being successful, but not to the extent of beating Carlton, obviously. And just while I'm on that subject of Carlton, when Essendon was thrown out of the finals in 2013 as part of the AFL's suite of punishments for bringing the game into disrepute, Carlton was the ninth placed team, so we were parachuted into the finals, where we played Richmond, another of our traditional rivals, and managed to beat them. So Essendon gave us a gift then, or I suppose it was the AFL. And then last season we played Essendon in the final game of the regular season, and this time they were allowed to play in the finals, and we didn't make the finals, but at least we had a draw with them. Of course, a win would have been nicer, but so there has been quite a lot of Carlton involvement in the Essendon saga. But moving on, the title of my paper, making a play on player supplements being supposedly slightly nutritious, was raised in the previous session. Are supplements any use or any good? And we don't even know what they took. Not quite sure what it was supposed to be achieving. The club doctor expressed some concern about the supplement program, possibly not enough. And how did his letter to the board expressing their concern never get delivered? What's with their postal system? We've heard some criticism of governance at Essendon. That seems to have been part that didn't work, but also the club dietitian expressed concern, but her concern was more, is this stuff doing any good? It's not scientifically proved, whatever it is, and aren't we trying to build them up with proper diets with real food rather than these supplements? But nevertheless, the supplement guys, and so there are three strands to my paper. There's the player supplements, what's going into the players' bodies and what's that all about. There's the lawyer's picnic, and I speak as a legal academic, and will be saying something about the work that it's provided for lawyers. And the third part, the media feast, that it's really the media who have been the major beneficiaries of the saga. It's the gift that keeps on giving, and they're probably hoping that it will keep going forever. So we have an initial problem, I guess, of not knowing the facts, and again, that works for the media because it enables endless speculation. It also works for the lawyers because you can make lots of arguments, and it's more difficult when the facts are against you. But there does seem to be furious agreement that Essendon's governance was faulty. They brought in Dr. Ziggy Switkowski to report on their governance, and not surprisingly, he found failures of governance at all levels, and as again was pointed out in the previous session, there's a wealth of literature and experts on corporate governance who could come in and tell them how to do it better, and Switkowski an example of that. But I want to cast a bit of doubt on that. Sport is not just another business, and the models that work for corporate governance in the commercial sector don't necessarily work in a sporting context. Now, that's not to say that there aren't things that sports can learn from more general corporate governance, and that perhaps gives me the opportunity to spruik a conference on governance that we're running at VU in mid-April, and I'm running a workshop on sports governance, and we're also inviting papers on a variety of governance issues, including sports governance. So I don't think the call is closed for that, so I encourage you to put in a paper and come on down to Melbourne. But I think sport is about much more than making money, and indeed that's a secondary consideration, though, again, building on what Bob said, it's important that clubs aren't completely out of touch with financial reality, and we're seeing in the English Premier League and other European soccer leagues, this may be the case, that they're just spending enormous amounts of money and being insolvent, and that's causing other problems. But that's not a problem in the AFL. AFL is awash with money, and it's about having a good competition with integrity and with good player management, and trying to achieve positive social outcomes as well. Now, possibly going a little bit off topic when I say that I think Andrew Demetriou got a bit carried away with the AFL's social mission and saw it being able to solve all society's problems, and you just have a themed round about every problem, and 22 rounds to go, you can probably solve all the world's problems. I think that's a bit of overreach, but I do very strongly believe that sport is more important than commerce, and particularly if we let the game be run for the benefit of the bookies, that we will have lost something very important. Football originating in Melbourne is a tribal thing. It gives us something to identify with, and we love the game, we love our clubs. We play to win, and it's sounding like the Hawthorn theme song. But if we can keep sight of that, the reason why we're playing sport, that will help us keep our moral compass. Now, I think the AFL was unwise to get into bed with ASADA. We've again heard in the previous session a bit about the AFL's illicit drug regime and how it's the strictest sporting anti-drug regime in the world. They didn't have a problem with performance-enhancing drugs, but am I being naive about that? It was just that they weren't doing enough testing, but they did have a performance-enhancing drug regime that had caught at least one person. But why did they sign up with ASADA? The Commonwealth didn't have the power to force them to do that. There was some Australian Sports Commission money, I think about $30 million at stake, but the AFL is $1 billion business. They didn't need the ASC's money, but I think they wanted to be seen as, well, good citizens, and you've got to be against doping. It's obviously bad, and it is, but I think they also wanted to be seen as players on the world stage, and they love the American sports. They love going over and seeing how that's done, and they've brought that back here and introduced a franchise model to the AFL, which is another thing I could go on about how bad that is, but it's currently a fact. And they wanted to rub shoulders with other sports codes around the world, and so to be able to do that with credibility, they had to sign up with ASADA that had signed up with WADA. But in doing that, they have shackled themselves to a monster, because ASADA, it's a Commonwealth agency, and it's got its own agenda. We saw from that blackest day in Australian sport, that notorious press conference, and going to suggest that there's a bit of a curse attached to all this. We see that it was the Gillard Labor government that held that press conference. Where are they now? And ASADA has lost its CEO, and it was like, we've got to get a result for Aurora before she retires, and now they've got a new guy in who's been able to come in as like a new broom, but he's very much following the party line that they've got to bring this case to a conclusion. I'm going to put on my legal hat and say I think they've got a problem of a lack of evidence. And if you've got a lack of evidence, you've got a problem bringing prosecutions. So that's why this investigation has dragged on so long, because they're relying on the word of people like Dr. Ageless and the compounding pharmacist who don't have consistent stories, and in the case of Ageless, he's a convicted drug trafficker. They don't have credibility. They're not the people you'd want standing up for you in court, and they were going to be brought to the tribunal, and suddenly they weren't willing to give evidence anymore. So if that's the best you got, a prosecutor could tell you, you dropped the case. Now, the AFL didn't have that problem, because they are prosecutor, judge and jury. So they had it all worked out. They were able to lay the charge of bringing the game into disrepute, which their own commission gets to decide. And you don't need any evidence for that. You just need a perception. And the perception of having these guys having these secret injecting programs off-site, and the consent forms have been lost, and we don't know what they were administering. That's a bad look, and that seems to be the greatest crime for the AFL. They've really got on board with this brand protection thing, so they don't want a look like that bringing the game into disrepute. So they had to act, and they had this wonderful Rule 1.6 to charge everybody with. Now, they made a mistake charging Dr. Reid, because he was clearly absolutely honest and integrated, and had tried to stop the program, or at least question it. So charging him was a mistake. They charged the club, they charged Hurd, the chief coach, and they charged the football operations manager, and they charged Thompson, the assistant coach. And there was going to be a court challenge, and Hurd had retained Julian Burnside QC, who's a very good barrister, and it would have been great fun to see him taking the AFL apart in court. But instead, we had something that you get if you let businessmen run the game, and that is a negotiated settlement. Now, as a lawyer, this sticks in my throat. You don't have negotiated settlements to criminal charges. Now, sure, we have plea bargaining, and that's effectively what this was, but the idea that you resolve a serious issue of guilt by having hours of negotiations, and we've got to bring this to a commercial settlement, guys. And the negotiated penalties that were so neat that Hurd is suspended for a year, but they forget to say that he's not allowed to be paid. So he's suspended for a year on full pay, and he gets to go off to France and do a management course. So he was severely punished. And they fined the assistant coach, Mark Thompson, $30,000, which he didn't pay, and he was allowed to step in and coach the team the following year. Did it very well. They were also fined $2 million, but with the business backing of the club, that wasn't a severe penalty. The most severe penalty has really been the loss of draft picks, and I guess the general trauma that the whole thing has caused, that fears have been whipped up about what the players took and whether it would affect their unborn children. and just generally being embroiled in this much scandal has clearly done the club some harm, but they still managed to make the finals last year. Now, we will see in the fullness of time what the loss of draft picks does to them. But I'm actually left wanting to see Herd come back and show what he can do as a coach with a clean team, and that it's on the field that their redemption will come. I also think that the AFL wanted to be able to impose a suspension on the players like the one that was handed out for the Cronulla players, that if you can have a backdated suspension of 6 months that covers the off-season. I think they missed a couple of rounds at the end of one season. But I think that's what they wanted, and Essendon have cruelled that by contesting the legality of the investigation. So now the tribunal's still having its deliberations, and that's the result that I'm tipping, that they will get a backdated 6-month suspension enabling them to play in the regular season. But those are my thoughts on it, that ASADA is a very blunt instrument to be tackling the problem. The ASADA code is fitted more to individual athletes than to teams. It's possible it was appropriate to punish Essendon as a club and a team, but the individual players were really doing what they were told with the approval of the club, as it seemed, that Herd was in support of it. So it's really the ASADA regime that's a problem. That has made it drag on, but there's clearly also a problem with the AFL being able to be prosecutor, judge and jury, and in not being able to bring this to a speedy conclusion so that we can get on with the sport. I mean, when you're commit an infraction in a game, the tribunal sits immediately and you're rubbed out possibly for the next few games. You don't wait for 2 years and then say, well, we're going to suspend you for something that you did 2 years ago.